K24. This is Louis. Tonight, science and innovation, the connection between this kind of institutes, this kind of discussion, this kind of importance, and the Millennium Development Goals. How far off are we? How close are we? And even if we're measuring these markers, to what extent are we about to achieve them in terms of relevance? And how comfortable are we about them as we discuss them? We're having a discussion in the studio today that is not just going to be academic, but it will be able to show you in many ways than one, the things that we should look out for as indicators and markers when Africa says we must achieve Millennium Development Goals. Two gentlemen in the studio. I'm happy to have Dr. Kevin Urama, Executive Director, Africa Technology Policy Studies. Is that right?
Yes.
Pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you.
Here's with Dr. Nicholas Ozor, who is Postdoctoral Research Officer at the same Africa Technology Policy Studies. Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Right. As I said at the beginning, you'll tell me what postdoctoral research means. Thank you for coming, gentlemen. We're talking about the importance of science, technology, and innovation in these aspects and tying them down to the MDGs. But first, tell me about ATPS.
Okay, thank you very much. The African Technology Policy Studies Network, ATPS in short, is a network of researchers, policymakers, private sector actors, and also civil society who are working on science, technology, and innovation for sustainable development in Africa. So we look at areas from both supporting research and research capacity building to communication of that research, including media outreach to the people of Africa for them to understand the need for building capacity in science, technology, and innovation for Africa to develop.
You never talk to me, how come?
We are talking to you now, and also we try to support policy processes in order to create the policy environment for science, technology, and innovation to be able to blossom in Africa. And from our experience, we have a lot of innovators out there, especially amongst the youths of Africa, who are orphans in the sense that they don't have parents, parenting schemes in terms of available policies, available environment or mentorship schemes that will be able to help them to harness these talents that they do have in order to bear on development in Africa. So our work cuts across that, and also gender empowerment in order to bring women of Africa to participate actively in shaping their own destinies through science, technology, and innovation in Africa.
Right. Well, Dr. Ozor, very long title.
Yeah.
Tell me about a postdoctoral research officer.
Thank you very much. Postdoctoral research work is a kind of a continuation of research activity for young doctoral graduates who have just finished their PhDs and want to sharpen their research vision in specific areas. And for me at ATPS, I'm doing that in the areas of climate change, agricultural innovations, and science, technology, and innovation.
Right. Dr. Emma, this is not one of the easiest things, even when we're in school. When we see the girls are doing sciences, we shied away from it because you guys were onto different things. But in many respects, the things which we think we're pursuing in total independence actually come back to the sciences you're talking about. Can we have some of the times, especially now that you're saying without this kind of intervention, we really are not doing much if we're talking about developing a country?
Yeah. Okay, now let's try and discuss this from the perspectives of the Millennium Development Goals, to which many countries in Africa and in the rest of the world has signed up to. And we have given ourselves some quantitative indicators on where we should be by 2015. And these quantitative indicators that the Millennium Development Goals has created has led to a gamut of technologies and policies and actions by governments, programs and research going on all across the continent. And we find that lack of interest in science, technology and innovation in the past decade in Africa has led to Africa still running the risk of not meeting the Millennium Development Goals. We've had a lot of policy changes that has created a lot of changes in Africa, infrastructure development and the rest of all these, but we still find that Africa still exports primary goods with very little value addition. We export raw tomatoes and import processed tomatoes at 10 times the price of what we exported it for. And we export raw materials from different types of crops, different types of raw materials, our timber and all these things. We export them without adding value to them. And what's the missing link? It's not really not having economic policies, but it's actually lacking capacity in being able to add that value. And the only thing that actually has added value in all the other economies is science, technology, and innovation.
Right.
And what do I really mean by science? You know, you say people were shying away from science in secondary schools and universities in Africa because we thought of science as something really very esoteric to man. But science is life. There is science of communication, there is science of economics, there is science of intellectual property rights, there is science of how to produce the ICT tools that you're using here. So science is everything you do in order to understand any phenomena better in a systematic way. And that systematic understanding of phenomena and gathering knowledge in that way that is documented and codified becomes science.
How about the investment of having more of Dr. Ozob? Because it is a challenge now that there's not a lot of investment in terms of putting out funds, putting out budget allocations to have people pursue your studies at your level to then feed into what Kevin is talking about here. There is that gap. I don't know if it's Africa-wide or if there are specific countries that have seen the need to put investments in more of Dr. Ozob, because that's a challenge even in Kenya.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, Sub-Saharan Africa is the most hit by this because our investment ratio is very low. In terms of the investment that the African Union, for instance, has said every country in Africa should invest at least 1% of their GDP to research and development. Not every country is doing it in Africa. It's only South Africa that has reached about 0.98% of this. Most African countries are below 0.3%. So you find out that if you don't have good investment in science, technology, and innovation, or in research and development, which is a policy issue, as a matter of fact, the government is supposed to allocate a certain amount of money to the development of research and development. And if they don't do that, then it will reduce the output that you get from research and development. So that is one great problem that Africa has today. And that is why we are saying that African governments need to acknowledge this point and begin to raise their investment potentials to at least that 1% that the African Union has set on or before 2015.
Yeah, but Dr. Rahman, there's also the question of traction. How much traction do you have within African governments? Because we don't have a celebration of a lot of African countries making policy decisions informed by research. Either informed by, unfortunately, by whims or by political shenanigans, but we hardly get policy being informed in a way that it is spread and accepted across a country. That because of the research that has been found in this particular area, we are changing our agricultural dynamics or profession to this manner. So we are dependent on the innovation of a single person. And if that person is able to get the buy-in of the government to fund it to proceed.
Yeah. Now, the issue is really related to the general outlook to science, technology, and innovation in Africa, and also the type of science, technology, and innovation we do in Africa. As a scientist, I used to think that policymakers in Africa are to blame for not actually, implementing policies that are evidence-based, based on the evidence from science in Africa, homegrown science from scientists in Africa, and so on. But having now worked with policymakers on policy advocacy at ATPS for some time, I do realize there's actually a dearth of that knowledge. We don't have robust knowledge that you can actually rely on many subjects that relate to Africa.
So the reluctance is genuine?
The reluctance is a bit genuine, but also not so genuine in the sense that it's still the same government that should build that capacity in order to make sure that Africans are able to be able to generate that homegrown science that we need. And why are we not generating that? a lot of funding for research and development in Africa comes from outside. And when donors are giving grants to African countries, they state what they want to be done. And some of these things that are stated as research objectives may not be the teething problems of the countries that we are working in. But for me to be a cutting-edge scientist, I will need to be doing cutting-edge research. And to do that cutting-edge research, I need funding in order to do that. And now what you find is that some organizations like the ATPS now try to source funding from the development partners in order to be able to fund research that is needs-based in Africa. And some universities in Africa are also doing that, but are not doing that enough. And if you try to link to the development goals of countries like Dr. Oza has just mentioned, only South Africa is approaching the agreed 1% of GDP ratio investment in research and development. But if you look at every other development indicator in Africa, South Africa is way ahead, almost by the same margin that they have given attention to science, technology, and innovation in Africa. So African policymakers are not always using research and research-informed policies because those research-informed policies are not always there. And with the policymakers I have worked with, you find that there is that hunger by the policymakers, there is that yearning to find results that can inform their policies. Because what our policymakers do in any case is trying to satisfy the needs of the people, because their relevance lies in continued serving of the people. But then if they don't have the information which they need readily at the time that they need it, then there is a problem there. And that is why we are advocating at the ATPS and other organizations that are working on science policy for Africa, that one way for Africa to start even thinking of achieving Millennium Development Goals is to start investing in science education, to start investing in technology development, to start investing on innovators who may not have gone to school, but they really have brilliant minds. So, and that way we'll be able to unlock the human resource potentials that are really so rich in Africa. And if you just think about statistics, for secondary schools in Africa, South Africa achieves about 95% of total population who are attending and who are enrolled in secondary schools. And other countries like Mauritius, Botswana, Cape Verde, Namibia, and interestingly Kenya are the only countries who have exceeded 50% mark in this rate. So if more than 50% of your population don't even have secondary education, it will be very difficult for policymakers to actually use science because they are serving the public. And most of the people who are in the citizenry don't understand the science we are talking about. They understand their daily needs. And that's why some of the policies we have in Africa are ad hoc, informed by people's needs today, and not really robustly researched to see whether addressing this issue is going to lead to another problem. Because policies in themselves are very complicated.
So what's like you appeal to now, Dr. Ozo? With this knowledge that you've gone to enhance and sharpen, I look at it this way: you've got finance ministry, planning ministry, all these people are looking at we need to have a plan. Who's most likely to listen to you now in an African government?
As a matter of fact, there is one popular understanding we have that politics is superior to science. And when we say that, we mean that you can be a good scientist, you can come out with good research effort, output, and if you don't win the influence of the politicians, those science outputs are going to end up in the shelves. But politics, as a matter of fact, is a day-to-day activity, and they influence even the scientists. For instance, if they say that 1% is going to go for research and development, it goes. The scientist himself benefits from that. So at ATPS, for instance, we have a peculiar role to influence the policymakers. They are the most important people in any country to make decisions, for instance, make policy, and ensure that those policies are implemented. So for us, we look at policymakers as very, very crucial for us in achieving any of the Millennium Development Goals, because once they accept and say, this is the way we want to do it, this is the way we want to do it, we want to drop the old methods and accept the new methods. It goes like that because it is signed into law, they have the machineries to implement them, and that is it.
But it is not uncommon to see students who have done their secondary education, gone through high school, and have qualified to go to university, institutes of higher learning. And in these institutions, then the kind of teaching, the kind of enhancement of skills that is there, what is imparted is probably not on a need basis in terms of what the country requires. Do we have evidence that someone like Dr. Ozo is on a need basis education plan? So when you emerge and when he lets loose Dr. Ozo from the ATPS, there's a specific gap for you in terms of where the country needs an area developed, and you can plug it in straight away.
Actually, it depends on the individual. As a matter of fact, for myself, I build my career and I know what I want. And like I said, at ATPS, I champion climate change research, agricultural innovations, and this issue of science, technology, and innovation. These are based on topical areas of need, which I feel that I have identified in Africa as a whole, and I want to fill in the gaps. So for me, that is what informs my career progression, and that's what guides me in making sure that I make my own mark in creating this, filling this gap.
And if I have to add to that, Louis, it's a very important question, because the type of education we have in our universities and in our primary schools and colleges, most are sometimes for literacy.
Yes.
You learn how to read, you learn how to write, you learn how to reproduce what you have read. And the attitude of trying to link that knowledge you have gathered to creating technologies, prototypes for change in Africa, is something that has just started emerging in the last decade, and also even creating innovators has also been a problem. And this is why you find that in most cases you produce engineers that would love to just wear ties and go around and give instructions to technicians who have to do the job, because we are being taught the type of education that is actually leading us to become job seekers and not entrepreneurs in themselves. But this is changing in Africa. In the last decade, you are finding a lot of universities, most of which some Kenyan universities are really doing very well in terms of trying to teach soft skills. This knowledge you are getting, what can you do with it in order to solve what problems? And then we are beginning to find, career mentorship that is happening across different institutions. For women, we have the award program. We have the African Women in Science and Technology Forum, which ATPS is hosting. We have the AYFST, African Youth for Science and Technology program, where we're having experts, both from the private sector and also policymakers, now interacting with the students and telling them really, this is really what we need. So this knowledge you are getting is important, but you have to apply it this way in order to answer this problem.
You move to the youth a lot. Is there much interest now? Is this something we're looking at as a ways and a means to achieving whatever area of their countries of feelings development? Can they now see the importance of STI?
Now, increasingly, I would say that the awareness is growing in Africa. A lot of institutions, by God's grace, has been working on this. The International Development Research Center in Africa, the regional office in Africa, has done quite a lot to build capacity in science, technology, and innovation in different areas. They formed the ATPS, and they formed the AERC, and many other institutions that are focusing on trying to raise this awareness and build that capacity within the continent. So, and you asked the question about youths. If we leave youths and women behind in Africa, I personally believe we will go nowhere, because this is the larger population of the continent, and these are the people also who have the leverage and freedom to innovate, because innovation is an attitude. You need to be able to take risks, you need to have an inquisitive mind, you need to be able to do things on trial and error basis, and the more time you have in your life, the more likelihood you can be able to do that. And that is why
if they kind of flip the pen in this scenario, what people are looking for is you find people sitting in a boardroom and thinking, what are the youth doing now that we can tap into and get their interest. Translation for them, of course, is votes. Nothing more than what they do. And what are the women doing now that we can tap into? There isn't enough of what can we then innovate, as you're saying, or what can we fuel, as you say, to get the youth to get attracted to it.
Yeah.
And if they get engaged in that, the vote is okay, but it will be a ripple effect. It will be an offshoot of the groundwork in getting things that the youth can get engaged in. So innovation is not being, they're not looking at it from a creative sense.
Yeah.
And obviously left to their own devices, not many people will think beyond what they know has been working for the longest time. So what you're saying is new, and they're thinking, it hasn't really worked here. Why should I listen to you? That's change. We're not very good at change.
Now, if you think about the terrain within which our policymakers are working, then you will understand why change is a difficult concept. But I have to say that a lot of policymakers in Africa are innovators themselves and have been trying to champion this act of trying to get the youths and the women innovate to also innovative policies. If I think about Kenya, the new constitution we have is a great innovation that creates a platform for innovation to thrive. It opens more space for freedom of invention, it creates more space for freedom of speech, and the people are more involved in defining their own rules. Because the issues with innovation, science and technology is that it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens within a system. And you ask the question on which ministry are we going to be looking at, I would say all of them. Even though we may have ministries called Higher Education, Science and Technology, the remit of championing science and technology is not only within them. Because if you think about Africa, agriculture is still the occupation of a larger population of the people.
And you see about subsistence or commercial.
And all these things. So what we really advocate is a national system of innovation where all the different ministries are working together to make sure that science in agriculture, science in industry, science in economics, science in anything that science has implications for can be brought to bear to define the needs of the people, find solutions to them, create technologies to address those solutions, and build innovative capacity within this system. So we need institutional innovation, we need process innovation, we need product innovation, we need innovation at different levels.
Come back and tie us in. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we want to tie us in to actually achieving MDGs and see if there are risks to anything, because possibly if we then take all this on board, do they all end up being a plus for us, or are there negatives we should look out for? This and more after a break.
This is Loop.